Welcome to the Great Basin Prescribed Fire and Smoke Transport Briefing for Friday, February 16th. Looking at the last 7 to 14 days, we've seen some drier conditions across parts of the western areas of the Great Basin this last week, with some precipitation on the lighter side across northern and eastern areas of the Great Basin. Some heavier precipitation has been occurring in the Sierra. Over the last 2 weeks, however, we have seen above normal precipitation in many areas of southern Idaho, into much of Utah, and even southern Nevada. Some drier spots have been western Wyoming, central Idaho, and northwest and western Nevada into the northern Sierra. Snowfall over the last 72 hours, we have seen some new snowfall with storm systems moving across the northern half of the Great Basin. So some new snowfall across Idaho, over into Wyoming, and also the Sierra, and you can see the snow depth on the right. And the snowpack has generally been doing fairly well across much of Nevada and Utah and Arizona, with near to just above normal snowpack. We've seen normal conditions in southern Idaho, but still well below normal snowpack in the Sierra, western Nevada, and again those drier spots of central Idaho and western Wyoming. We will see additional storm systems move through the Great Basin over the next 7 to 10 days, so we will see some additions to this snowpack. Looking at our satellite loop from this morning, we do have high pressure building into the west coast, but a very strong trough of low pressure in the Pacific, which is generating quite a bit of moisture, which will be spilling over the top of that ridge. So we will see continued cloud cover moving across the Great Basin, and also a weak disturbance in Idaho, still bringing some light shower activity in Idaho, Wyoming, and northern Utah. So for later today, again, you will continue to see that pattern move eastward. Generally, our winds will be on the gusty side over parts of northern Utah, northeast Nevada, and southern Idaho, keeping that dispersion a little bit higher. And you can see that in the transport winds, where we will see gusts between about 30 and 40 miles per hour or higher, especially in the higher terrain of the Uintas and into the northern Wasatch. Mixing heights will remain low to moderate. Temperatures today will generally be near to above normal, especially over the western and southern half of the Great Basin, with relative humidity above 25 to 30%. As we move into Saturday, this ridge pushes eastward into the eastern half of the Great Basin, opening the door for this area of low pressure to move into the west coast. So we will see moisture starting to push into California especially, and into the western half of Nevada, and even Idaho and Utah with some cloud cover, especially later in the day on Saturday. Winds will also be increasing, so we will see dispersion increase over the western half of the Great Basin. So winds generally in the 30 to 40 mile per hour range, with some higher ridge gusts, especially along the Sierra as this system moves in, and mixing heights low to moderate. Temperatures won't really change much on Saturday, as the bulk of this system really moves in later in the day on Saturday, and relative humidity also remains relatively unchanged. As we move into Sunday, this first system starts to move through later on Saturday into Sunday, and we still keep the presence of this trough off the west coast, so this will continue sending weaker disturbances out ahead of the trough into the Great Basin over the next several days through the weekend into next week. Transport winds still remain somewhat breezy over northern western areas of the Great Basin, but generally not quite as strong as what we'll see here the next couple of days. Still some stronger winds in California and gusty ridge winds in the Sierra. Otherwise, mixing heights will be on the rise with this trough of low pressure impacting the Great Basin. Sunday might be some of our warmer temperatures. We'll see some highs in the upper 50s over western Nevada, and even near 50 degrees or at 50 degrees in the lower elevations of southern Idaho and even northern Utah. Relative humidity will remain still about 25 to 35% or higher. Precipitation over the next few days, this takes us through Monday morning. You can see the bulk of these systems will be impacting the northern half of the Great Basin, at least initially through the weekend. The heavier precipitation will certainly be confined to California, also impacting the Sierra, especially on the west side, with again not as much precipitation moving into northern Nevada or Idaho or Wyoming, but still at least some good amounts of new snowfall in western Wyoming and parts of central Idaho that really have been seeing that deficit. As we go into Monday, this trough remains off the west coast, again pushing more moisture into the Great Basin early in the week, also keeping dispersion high, so we really won't see any stagnant air across the Great Basin, which is good news for inversions. And then going into Tuesday, this low pushes further along the west coast, so we'll see a better push of moisture going into Tuesday for the western and northern half of the Great Basin. And then by Wednesday, this system really starts to track eastward, but still keeping some presence of low pressure off the west coast. And by Thursday, we may see a kind of at least a break in the weather as ridging builds in between the exiting area of low pressure and the next one off the west coast. So possibly some drier conditions towards the middle to end of next week. Precipitation for Monday through early Wednesday, you can see still California getting all the heavy precipitation, but we will see a better chance of precipitation in Nevada, even northern Utah up into Wyoming and Idaho going into the early part of next week, and then a return of some precipitation down over southern areas, especially going into next week. And then as we go towards midweek, these systems track across the Great Basin, bringing at least some light precipitation to most areas. The only areas that really might not see much of any precipitation might be parts of eastern Utah. And then the 7-day total precipitation, again showing that hole over eastern Utah, but much of the rest of the Great Basin at least getting some light precipitation, certainly the heaviest amounts in the Sierra and into California, but still some good additions to the snowpack up over eastern Idaho, western Wyoming, northern Utah, and in parts of central Idaho, but much of central Idaho really won't be getting into that heavier snowfall. The 8 to 14-day outlook, taking us into the end of the month, still shows storm systems continuing to move through the Great Basin every few days, so keeping that above normal precipitation signature along the west coast, and again moving into the Great Basin, but obviously the heaviest amounts of precipitation, most above normal, still look like they would be in the coastal states, and then not as much as you go further east, but again, still that wetter, more active weather pattern continuing for the west. That concludes our webcast for today. Check back on Wednesday for the latest updates, as Monday is a holiday. Have a great weekend.